Good evening, I'm Hugh, and this is Ghost Stories, where truth hides behind the veil of shadow, and the past refuses to stay buried. Tonight begins a new collection of tales. 4 encounters with the unseen, 4 brushings against the cold edge of something we can't quite explain. Our first story comes from Texas, but it didn't start in this century, or the last. It started with a woman in white, standing by a river, crying for her children. And if you hear her weeping, it may already be too late. This is the story of La Llorona, the crying woman of Texas. The Salinas family had never been especially superstitious. They lived in a modest home outside San Antonio, surrounded by mesquite trees and quiet neighbors. Life was steady, predictable, until the rain came. It had been dry for months, the kind of Texas summer that bakes the land until the earth splits open. Then, one late September evening, the skies cracked open and the storm rolled in. By midnight, roads were flooding, sirens howled in the distance. The wind carried voices no one could understand. But what the Salinas family remembered most was the weeping. It was Clara, the youngest, who heard it first. A girl of 7, wide-eyed and quiet, she padded into her parents' bedroom just after 1 a.m., soaked in sweat. "She's crying," Clara said. "Who?" "Mija," her mother asked, half asleep. "The lady outside," Clara whispered. "She's sad. She lost her babies." Her mother pulled her into bed, thinking it was just a nightmare. But then they heard it too, low, heartbroken, echoing just outside the window. A woman, crying, not the kind of cry you hear in grief. No, this was grief that had turned to something else, something darker, something dangerous. Mr. Salinas went to check, flashlight in hand. Nothing, only the pounding rain and wind slashing through the branches. But when he came back inside, Clara was staring at the window, frozen. "She saw you," Clara said. "Now she knows where we live." They chalked it up to imagination. A stormy night, a bad dream, the mind playing tricks, until the next night, the rain had stopped. But just after 2 a.m., the power cut out. The family woke to complete darkness and the sound of sobbing, again, just outside the window. This time, louder, closer. Then came a knock. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Mr. Salinas approached, heart racing. But before he could reach the handle, Clara screamed from the hallway. "The door! She's at the other door." They had a side entrance by the kitchen, rarely used. But when they rushed in, the door stood wide open, water pooling at the threshold. Clara was pointing, trembling. "She was there," she said. Her face was all bones. That's when they called the police. An officer came, inspected the house. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the mud, no sign of anyone at all. But before he left, the officer turned to Clara and asked gently, "Can you describe her?" Clara nodded. She had long black hair. Her dress was white, but dirty. Her hands were really long, and she kept saying something. "What was she saying?" the officer asked. Clara looked down. She said, "Dame mis hijos." "Give me back my children." The officer froze. His expression changed, and then he said something that chilled them all. "You're not the first to say that." Back in 1994, the house belonged to a different family. a woman and her 2 sons. During a similar storm, both children went missing. They were later found in the river, just downstream, drowned. No one ever found out how. The mother vanished. A week later, people whispered that she had taken her own life out of guilt. Others said she'd made a pact, that her grief had turned into something eternal, that her spirit roamed the rivers and floodplains, crying, begging, searching. La Llorona, the crying woman, a legend passed down across generations, across countries, always the same shape: a mother, a river, a tragedy, and the children who never came back. Some say she appears near water, others say she follows storms, but all agree, if you hear her crying, don't look for her, because once you see her, she sees you. The Salinas family tried to brush it off, for Clara's sake. But over the next week, things got worse. At school, Clara started drawing the same picture: a tall, thin woman with no eyes and long fingers dripping water. Their dog refused to go outside after dark, and every night, at exactly 2:11 a.m., the house would go cold, not cool, freezing, like something had entered. One night, Clara woke up screaming. When her parents reached her room, they found her under the bed, shaking. She tried to take me, Clara sobbed. She was pulling me out the window. There were scratches on the windowsill, but no one had opened it, and muddy handprints, long, thin, marked the outside glass. They had to leave. They packed that same night and drove north to stay with family. As they pulled out of the driveway, Clara looked back. "She's standing in the yard," she whispered. Mrs. Salinas glanced in the rearview mirror. Just for a second, she thought she saw a white shape, soaking wet, watching them. Then it was gone, but she wasn't. Because when you hear her cry, when she speaks your name, when she follows your daughter home, it doesn't end at the riverbank. The Salinas family didn't sleep the first night in Corpus Christi. Even miles from home, far from the river and their dark backyard, something still felt wrong. Mrs. Salinas tried to pray. Mr. Salinas stared at the door all night, clutching a kitchen knife, and Clara, quiet, brave little Clara, stood at the window, watching the rain return. "She found us," she said softly, just before sunrise. She always finds her children. The next few days were uneasy. Things didn't move on their own. There were no knocks in the night, no footprints, no weeping. For a moment, they believed maybe, just maybe, it was over, until the mirror cracked. It happened on the third night. Clara's aunt, who had been kind enough to give up her guest room, walked in to find the vanity mirror shattered from the inside out, and etched across the surface, written in the tiniest, jagged script, was a phrase: "I cried for them, now I cry for you." They tried to dismiss it, called it an accident, heat, tension, old glass, but Mr. Salinas knew better. He had just come from the garage, where he'd found something far stranger: his daughter's drawing, the one with the faceless woman and the long hands, tacked onto the wall with a nail that hadn't been there before. The paper was soaked, and on the back was a single word written in mud: Clara. That night, Clara disappeared. They found her in the backyard, standing barefoot in the mud, eyes wide open and glassy. She was whispering to someone. When her father approached, he realized she wasn't whispering, she was listening to something no one else could hear. And then she turned to him and said, "She said you didn't protect your other children either." Panic set in. The family decided to leave the state. They packed what they could, prepared to leave before dawn. But at 3:03 a.m., every door in the house slammed shut at once. Clara began to scream. Mrs. Salinas found her in the hallway, floating 3 inches off the ground, her nightgown soaked through. And then, in a voice that was not her own, she spoke. "They cried for you. Now you will cry for them." The lights burst. The hallway filled with icy fog, and just beyond the broken window, the outline of a tall, thin woman stood at the edge of the lawn, her head tilted, her arms outstretched, calling, always calling. The next morning, a priest came from the local church, an older man. He'd dealt with things like this before. He didn't laugh. He didn't explain it away. He listened, and then he said, "She's tied to grief, to guilt, to bloodlines. If she has chosen your family, she won't stop. Not until someone answers her." The priest conducted a cleansing, holy water, prayers in Latin, a blessed crucifix buried beneath the threshold. He instructed them never to speak her name again, not even in thought. That night was quiet until 2:11 a.m., when Clara woke screaming, holding her throat, choking on river water that shouldn't have been there. In the days that followed, the family reached out to a bruja, a folk healer from South Texas. She came with herbs, with chants older than Christianity, with a candle that burned blue, and she listened, just like the priest had. When they finished the ritual, the bruja said only one thing: "You are marked. One of you must return." What was taken? They didn't understand. Clara began to get worse. She stopped speaking during the day, but at night, they'd find her sleepwalking, always toward the door, always whispering something in Spanish. Her parents didn't teach her. "Mis hijos, mis hijos." In desperation, Mr. Salinas drove back to the house they had abandoned. He walked the rooms, called her name once. The house was silent, but in the bathroom, the mirror was whole again, and in its reflection, he saw her. Not directly, never directly, but a shape in the corner, dripping wet, hands brushing the tile floor. And then she moved toward him. He ran. Back in Corpus Christi, Clara sat up suddenly that same night, and she whispered. She let him go. Weeks passed. The family never returned to San Antonio, but the dreams never stopped. The crying still came. Some nights, distant, like a memory. Other nights, right outside the window. Clara would sometimes wake soaked in water with no explanation. And one day, she drew a new picture. It showed her, a little older, walking hand in hand with a woman in white. When asked about it, Clara smiled sadly. "She's not bad," she said. "She's just lonely." The crying woman of Texas still walks near rivers. She follows storms. She listens for children. And if you hear her, don't open your eyes. The crying woman of Texas reminds us that some spirits never move on. They stay, waiting in the places where they lost everything. And sometimes, those places move with them. Our next story doesn't come from a small house or a lonely road. It comes from the sea, from a floating monument of steel and sorrow, a ship that once carried soldiers to war, a ship that became a luxury ocean liner, a ship now docked forever in Long Beach, California. But she is anything but quiet. This is the story of the Queen Mary. David Chen wasn't looking for ghosts. He was a structural engineer hired to inspect the lower decks of the RMS Queen Mary. Before a round of renovations, it was supposed to be simple: document any corrosion, check the watertight doors, and report back. But by the second night, he knew something was wrong. He started hearing footsteps on decks that were supposed to be sealed, voices behind bulkheads, the creak of beds that hadn't been used in decades. And then came the laughing, children's laughter, echoing through the halls. He was alone. The Queen Mary had long been rumored to be haunted. Tourists spoke of cold spots in cabin B340, of a woman in 1930s attire walking the halls at night, of ghostly crewmen seen in the engine room. But David wasn't a tourist. He didn't believe in stories until the door slammed shut behind him. He'd gone to check the infamous watertight door, Juror 13, where in 1966, a young sailor named John Petter had been crushed to death during a routine drill. It was supposed to be welded shut, but when David turned the corner, the heavy steel door was wide open, and standing just beyond it was someone, a man, tall, pale, wearing old navy blues. David blinked, and the man was gone. Then the door began to close, slowly, with a grinding groan that echoed through the corridor. David barely rolled under it before it sealed shut with a hiss. Back in his cabin, David tried to convince himself it was mechanical failure, a glitch, nothing more, until he checked the maintenance logs. Door number 13 had been welded shut 6 years ago. There was no power to that section, no access, no explanation. That night, the dreams began. He saw a ballroom, empty, covered in dust, but filled with the sound of violins. A woman in a red dress danced alone, spinning as if someone invisible led her. And then she turned toward him. Her face was hollow, eyes black as oil, mouth open in a silent scream. David woke, gasping, cold, drenched in sweat, and on the mirror in his room, written in condensation, were the words, "They never left." The Queen Mary had served as a troop ship during World War II. Nicknamed the Gray Ghost, she carried tens of thousands of soldiers across the Atlantic. Some never made it back. There were deaths, accidents, suicides, illness, and rumors of bodies buried in the sea before landfall, and some believed their spirits never left the decks. David tried to request reassignment. He filed a report. His supervisor laughed. "Don't tell me the ghosts got you too," the man joked. But David wasn't laughing. He stopped sleeping. He heard footsteps every night, and sometimes he swore he could hear Morse code coming through the walls, dots and dashes tapping in long-forgotten patterns. On his final night aboard, David returned to door number 13. He needed closure. He needed to prove it was all in his head. But when he got there, the corridor was different. The lights flickered, the walls were wet, dripping seawater, and this time, the door wasn't open. It was missing. In its place stood the figure of a man, eyes black, uniform stained with rust, blood seeping from his side. He raised one hand and pointed at David and said, in a voice like crushing pressure, "Report to duty." David ran, back through corridors that twisted the wrong way, past stairwells that weren't there the day before, and as he ran, he saw them, dozens of them, faces from the past, nurses, sailors, children, musicians, all silent, watching, and one by one, they whispered, "Don't leave us." He made it out. Barely. He left the Queen Mary that night and never returned. But some say his cabin remains sealed to this day, and on quiet nights, visitors still report hearing metal doors slamming and the low groan of a man crushed in the darkness. The Queen Mary is no ordinary relic of the past. She carries with her a weight of memory, of tragedy, and perhaps something else entirely. After David Chen fled the ship and refused to ever return, management called it paranoia. But what happened next couldn't be dismissed. 3 days later, during a routine nighttime ghost tour, a woman named Emily Reyes, a tourist from Arizona, vanished right on deck B, the exact deck where David saw the man in navy blue. The tour guide, Alex Morales, had done dozens of these walks. He was used to guests feeling uneasy or asking if the ship was rigged to spook them. The Queen Mary had a reputation to uphold, but Emily's disappearance wasn't staged. She'd fallen behind the group near the engine control room, just a few steps. Alex turned around after a loud metallic clang and realized she was gone without a sound. There were no other exits, no open doors, no signs of where she could have gone, except for one thing. The old intercom system crackled to life, and from it, a woman's voice whispered, "I found him." Security swept the ship. They assumed she'd gotten lost or wandered into a closed area, but thermal cameras showed no trace of her. Sniffer dogs brought in the next morning refused to enter the boiler room. They whined. One ran off. Then they found Emily's phone. It had somehow ended up inside a locked storage room under the stairs near cabin B340, a room that hadn't been opened in over 12 years. On the phone was one video. The footage was shaky, dim. Emily had been filming the hallway as she lagged behind the tour, but the last 20 seconds, you can hear her breathing, fast, the sound of bare feet slapping metal, and then she gasps and says, "Who are you?" There's no reply, but something giggles, soft and high, like a child. And the final frame of the video shows Emily turning the camera toward a hallway mirror where a woman in a red dress is standing behind her, smiling. After that, the ship's operators shut down tours temporarily. Officially, they cited maintenance. Unofficially, rumors spread like fire. They say the Queen Mary is alive in some way, that her walls remember and sometimes replay tragedy for those who are sensitive. But others believe something else, that when people vanish aboard her, they don't really disappear. They become part of her. Weeks passed, and then Alex Morales, the tour guide who witnessed Emily's disappearance, started experiencing something strange. His home phone would ring at 2:17 a.m. every night. No caller ID, just static. Until one night, he picked up and heard, "She dances with them now." And then, a single, long violin note. Alex quit his job, moved out of state, told his story once on a paranormal podcast. He never spoke of it again. Today, the Queen Mary is a hotel, a museum, and a monument. But behind the elegance, the warm lighting, the polished decks, something waits. Tourists still report sudden drops in temperature near the pool, children's voices in the infirmary, wet footprints leading into sealed rooms, and in cabin B340, if you stay very still around midnight, some say you can hear a woman humming a lullaby, off-key. Not all ghosts are angry. Some are lonely, but the Queen Mary doesn't care which kind she holds. She welcomes them all. And once you step aboard, she may never let you leave. The Queen Mary's ghostly grandeur reminds us that some places collect spirits the way others collect dust. But not all hauntings are tied to tragic history. Some we invite in ourselves. Our next story is about a choice, a simple decision made alone, late at night, a candle, a board, a question whispered into darkness, and something that answered. This is the story of Played Ouija, alone. Lena Alvarez had just moved into her first apartment, small, cozy, cheap, too cheap, but it was hers. She was 22, just graduated, and looking to build a new chapter. The building was old, built in the 1920s, with creaky wood floors and stubborn pipes that groaned like an old man in winter. Her basement unit had almost no sunlight, but she didn't mind. It was quiet, except at night. It started the third night, knocking, soft, 3 taps, always at 3:08 a.m. She assumed it was the neighbors or old plumbing, but when she finally asked the upstairs tenant about it, they looked at her confused. "We're on vacation, been gone all week." That same night, Lena noticed something else. Her hallway closet door was open. She didn't remember opening it. Inside sat a dusty cardboard box labeled in sharp, curling script, "Do not use alone." She opened it. Inside, a Ouija board, wooden, heavy, with letters engraved in faded gold. The planchette sat crookedly on top. Lena wasn't superstitious. She laughed it off, thought it might be a leftover prank. Still, she took the board out, cleaned it, and that night, out of curiosity or boredom or something else, she lit a candle, sat on her floor and said, "Is anyone there?" Nothing happened. She asked again, and then the flame flickered. The planchette moved, slowly, hesitantly. It spelled out, Y-E. Selena froze. "Who are you?" The response came faster. I-M-W-T-C-H-I-N. Gee, she laughed nervously. "Okay, very funny," she muttered. Assuming somehow it was a trick, she set the board aside and went to bed. But she woke up at 3:08 a.m. to the sound of whispers, not outside, from her closet. The next morning, the candle she'd used was broken in half. The Ouija board was on her table. She had packed it away the night before, and written on a scrap of paper beneath it were the words, "Play again. Alone. Please." She decided to call a friend, Marcus, to come over and try it with her. But when she tried to explain the situation, her phone froze. Every time she said Ouija, the call dropped. When Marcus finally came by in person, nothing happened. They tried using the board again, and the planchette wouldn't move. Marcus called it lame, and left early. That night, Lena awoke again, this time to find all her cabinets open, her bathroom mirror cracked, and her phone flashing a single, unanswered, call unknown, 308. Things escalated quickly after that. She began hearing breathing behind her. Her lights would turn off on their own. But most disturbing of all, she found the planchette in her bed every morning, and it always pointed in the same direction, to her closet. Desperate, Lena went online. She posted on a paranormal forum, describing what happened. Only one person responded, "You played alone. That's how it gets in. Whatever it is, it doesn't need permission now." They told her never to say goodbye late, never leave the board without closing. Lena had done both. One final time, she sat down to confront it. This time, the planchette moved immediately. She asked, "What do you want?" It spelled MEMORIE. As confused, she asked, "Whose memories?" The reply was slower. "Y-O-U-R." Then the planchette began to spin in circles, faster and faster, until it flew off the board and hit the wall. In the candlelight, she saw her reflection in the window, but it wasn't her. Same eyes, same face, but older, hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. And then, just like that, everything went black. When Lena came to, it was daylight. The board was gone, the closet door sealed shut, and carved into the inside of her bedroom door, in long, shallow scratches, were the words, "You played. Now I will." Some doors are meant to stay closed, and sometimes, when we open them, especially alone, they don't shut behind us. Lena Alvarez learned this too late. She had played the Ouija board once. Now, something else was playing her. For a few days after that final session, things went quiet. No more 3:08 a.m. phone calls. No more cold air from the closet. The board was gone. It felt like maybe, just maybe, it was over. But then Lena began forgetting things. Not little things, big ones. She'd find herself standing in the middle of the kitchen with no memory of making dinner, though the stove was hot and something was burning. She found messages on her phone she didn't remember sending, to people she hadn't spoken to in years, and they all said the same thing. "Do you remember me?" One morning, she woke up in bed, but her walls were covered in writing, not paint, not marker, fingernail scratches, over and over. "I was always here." She tried to leave the apartment, packed her things, grabbed her keys, but when she reached the door and unlocked it, it opened into her closet. No hallway, no escape. She slammed it shut, heart pounding. Tried again. Same thing. The world outside was gone. She began hearing voices when she turned on the tap, whispers bubbling up through the drain, calling her name, sometimes begging, sometimes laughing. The apartment, lights no longer worked. Her clocks all stopped at 3:08, permanently, and in every reflection, windows, mirrors, even her laptop screen, Lena saw someone standing behind her, never clear, just an outline, watching. Desperate, Lena returned to the paranormal forum where she had first posted. Her username was still active, but she hadn't posted anything new. Yet there were new messages. Under her name, dozens of them, each one responding to other people who had found Ouija boards. Each message said, "Play alone. It's the only way you'll know." It wasn't her, but it was using her, and it wanted to spread. She smashed her laptop, threw her phone in the sink, and tried to barricade herself in her bedroom. But the boards of the floor began warping beneath her feet, like something crawling underneath the wood. She heard a knock on her closet, not tapping this time, a knock like a fist. Then a voice, "You showed me the way. Now let me show you." At her wit's end, Lena did something she swore she'd never do again. She recreated the Ouija board, hand-drawn, on cardboard. She sat, lit a candle, and said, "Who are you really?" The planchette moved fast. "M. E. What do you want?" "Oh, you," and then it stopped. The candle flickered, and every drawer in the room slammed open at once. The lights went out. The air grew heavy, like something breathing right against her ear. She whispered, "Goodbye." But the planchette didn't stop, and then everything went black. Lena was found 2 days later. Her landlord had received complaints about screaming. When he broke in, the apartment was empty. No furniture, no candles, no signs of life. Just a hand-drawn Ouija board on the floor, and carved into the wall above it, "I'm not done playing." Lena was never seen again, but the forum remained active, and new posts appeared under her name. They always begin with, "I played alone." You should too. Be careful what games you play in the dark, because sometimes you're the prize. Next up, a house soaked in blood and legend. The kind of place where the walls remember everything. We're going to Fall River, Massachusetts, to the Lizzie Borden house. The whispering board left us with a warning. Some things don't haunt houses. They haunt people. But there are places so soaked in violence, so saturated with whispered theories and unspoken truths, that they become hauntings in and of themselves. This is one of those places. You know the rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. But what if I told you the real horror of the Lizzie Borden house isn't what happened in 1892? It's what keeps happening. The house still stands in Fall River, Massachusetts. Plain, boxy, modest, like a house that wants you to think it's innocent. But inside, it's anything but. Tour guides call it a museum now. Paranormal investigators call it a portal. And one couple, Jason and Renee Hammond, called it their honeymoon destination. They thought it would be fun, creepy. They were wrong. Jason was a history buff. Renee just wanted an interesting story for social media. They booked the infamous room where Abby Borden, Lizzie's stepmother, was found with her skull crushed in. "It'll be like sleeping in a crime scene," Renee joked. Their first night was mostly uneventful. Mostly, Jason heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. But when he checked, no one was there. They laughed it off. But then they found a silver hairbrush on the bed. They hadn't brought one, and carved into the wooden handle were the initials, AB. Things got stranger. Their second night, Jason set up a camera. "Just for fun," he said. At 3 a.m., it turned on by itself. No motion sensor, just recording. In the footage, Jason and Renee are asleep. Then, the closet door creaks open, A shadow moves across the room. Renee sits up, except she doesn't remember doing that. In the video, she turns to Jason and whispers, "She knows you saw her," then lies back down. In the morning, they watched the footage. Renee turned pale. "I don't remember that," she said. "I was asleep." Jason tried to brush it off, probably sleep talking. But her voice on the recording? It wasn't her voice. That afternoon, they toured the rest of the house. In the basement, Renee found an old hatchet on display, behind glass, labeled replica. But when she leaned in, the glass fogged up. On the inside, a single word appeared in the condensation: "Run." That night, they tried to leave, but their car keys were gone. So were their phones. The innkeeper claimed she hadn't seen either. They were stuck. They slept in separate beds that night, at Renee's insistence. But Jason never made it to bed. At 2:47 a.m., Renee woke up to muffled sounds from the bathroom. Dragging, shuffling. She got up, opened the door, and found Jason standing in front of the mirror. He was holding the replica hatchet. His reflection was smiling, but his real face was blank, she screamed. He dropped the hatchet, blinking, confused. What's going on? He had no memory of getting up. The hatchet was still behind glass, but there was a wet footprint beside the bed. Only one, and in the condensation on the bathroom mirror, he saw her. The next morning, they demanded to leave. But when they opened the front door, the street outside wasn't Fall River. It was nothing. Fog. Endless. They turned back, and the house had changed. Painted wallpaper where there was none. Oil lamps flickering. A ticking grandfather clock that hadn't worked in 100 years. The year felt different. And the innkeeper? She wasn't there. But a woman in old-fashioned clothing was standing at the top of the stairs, face hidden by a veil, holding a small, bloody cloth. Jason took Renee's hand. "Let's go upstairs." But Renee didn't move. "I don't want to see her face," she whispered. "Whose?" But she didn't answer. She just looked at the wall beside them, carved into the wood, newly scratched. She never left. The house once held the echoes of an unsolved murder. Now it holds more than echoes. It holds the living, and it doesn't let go easily. Jason and Renee Hammond were no longer tourists. The Lizzie Borden house had closed its doors around them, shifting them into something older, something trapped in time. They were now part of the house's memory, and memories, as we've learned, can turn violent. After the woman in the veil vanished from the staircase, Jason and Renee ran room to room, but the floor plan no longer matched the one they had toured just a day before. The sitting room had no exits. The kitchen looped endlessly back to the foyer. The upstairs hall stretched longer than it should. Door after door, all closed. Behind one, they heard a rhythmic sound. Whack, whack, whack. Jason opened it. Nothing inside, just a single chair and a mirror. But the sound continued, and then appeared. In the mirror, a figure standing behind them, raising a hatchet. Jason spun around. No one there. In desperation, they tried smashing a window, but the glass didn't shatter. It rippled, like water. Outside, the fog began to shift, revealing shadowy outlines of people watching from beyond. Dozens, silent, unmoving. Renee whispered, "They're the ones who never left." Back upstairs, Jason found a photo album. but the faces inside had no eyes. Each name was burned into the page, as if someone had scorched them in with a branding iron, and one page was blank. Only one. But the caption underneath read, "The Newlyweds." Renee began seeing things Jason didn't. Bloody handprints that vanished when she blinked. A cracked portrait of Lizzie that seemed to smile only when she wasn't looking. Worst of all, a little girl's voice whispering from the closet. She didn't kill them. Not really. At 3:00 a.m., they heard the ticking of a clock again, but they hadn't seen one in the house before. Following the sound, they came to a new room, the attic, dust-covered, choked with cobwebs. In the center, a coffin-sized trunk, closed with thick leather straps. Jason reached out to touch it. Renee screamed, "Don't!" But it was too late. The moment his hand touched the trunk, the house screamed, not groaned, screamed. Lights flickered to life, doors slammed. The walls pulsed like breathing lungs. Jason was thrown back, convulsing on the ground, whispering something over and over. Renee knelt beside him, crying, "What is it?" He looked up at her, his eyes glassy, and in a voice not his own, he said, "She let me in." Renee tried dragging him toward the stairs, toward the front door, but it was gone. Only a wall remained, and carved into it now, dripping fresh, "Finish what she started." Jason rose on his own, calm, cold. He whispered to Renee, "I see it now. It wasn't Lizzie." She backed away. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, empty. It was always the house. And then he turned toward the staircase and began to climb. The last thing Renee remembered before blacking out was the sound of a child laughing and the cold touch of a hand on her shoulder. She awoke outside, morning, sunlight, on the front lawn of the Lizzie Borden house, alone. No one knew what had happened. The innkeeper said they'd never checked in. Their names weren't in the guest book. No, Jason. No record, just Renee. Years later, Renee never remarried, never spoke publicly, except once, in a local podcast interview. The host asked her if she remembered anything from that night, anything at all. She nodded. "Just one thing," she whispered. "The house remembers me, and one day, it'll bring me back." The Lizzie Borden house still operates as a bed and breakfast. Guests report strange dreams, footsteps, faces in mirrors, but some report something far more chilling. They wake up to find a name scratched into their headboard. Not Lizzie, not Abby. Jason. Some houses are just buildings, others are waiting rooms, and you don't always leave. That concludes episode 3 of Ghost Stories. Tonight, we journeyed through the Crying Woman of Texas, the haunted halls of the Queen Mary, a dangerous game of Ouija, and the house that history refuses to let go of, Lizzie Borden's. If these stories chilled you even a little, be sure to subscribe, click that like button, and turn on notifications. We've got more haunted tales waiting just beyond the veil. Until next time, I'm Hugh, and you've been listening to Ghost Stories. Sleep well, if you can.